Your name, where are you from, and tell me about your research project.
Sure. So my name is Mac Ishii. I was originally born in Japan, but I grew up in Houston, Texas before moving to the Northeast, and I've been in New York City for about 20 years, where I've been affiliated with Weill Cornell as a medical student now on the faculty there, where I'm a neurologist and neuroscientist. And my research right now is focused on really studying the early features of Alzheimer's disease. So as everyone knows, Alzheimer's disease is a disease that affects the memory and it's very devastating. But what we now know is that that Alzheimer's disease occurs about 10, 20, or even 30 years before the memory decline. So I've been focusing on what's happening at that stage, and particularly in weight loss and in metabolism, and are there changes there that we can identify? And we have some pretty exciting research results from it.
So what do you hope your research is able to achieve?
Yeah, so one thing we want to do is, so we've been focusing on this weight loss feature because it is something that we see a lot, and as a physician, that's something I see in my patients as well too. And so what we hope to do is really identify what's the underlying mechanism for it. We still don't know why people lose weight. Initially, the thought is because patients unfortunately have significant memory and dementia, but that's not the case in this early stages, so we have to figure out what's going on. And by doing so, can we maybe reverse the process, because there's those who can maintain or even increase their weight. So can we identify those factors to reverse?
What inspired you to become a researcher?
That's always a great question, and I get a lot of students ask me that. And one thing I always like to say about it is, obviously, we get inspired by many different things. When I was younger, like many of us here, we were very interested in science. I didn't know quite what to do. Maybe coming from Houston, actually, I was originally a chemical engineer, so there's a lot of chemical engineers in Houston, and so I thought I might pursue that pathway. But my parents moved to Dallas, and then I had no friends in Dallas, so got making myself useful, so I ended up volunteering and working, actually, and got a fellowship to work at the medical center in Dallas. And there I got really inspired by clinician scientists. We started working on a project, and I quickly learned that there's a lot we don't know. And then we made some pretty important discoveries from that project, and then that's when I decided, hey, chemical engineering is great and all, but there's a lot of good research we can do in medicine, and that's what got me started.
Great. What message would you like to share about the importance of scientific research?
Yeah, so I think people get bogged down with scientific research because it does take time for it to happen. And so I guess my message about scientific research is that a lot of times people say it gets very discouraging because in Alzheimer's disease, especially in our field, we don't have any cures, we don't have any really effective ways of preventing or even really good treatments. But I think what the research has really shown is that we've made a lot of advances in the past 10 or 20 years. We can now identify people much earlier than we could before and with greater accuracy. And now that we can do that, we can actually start studying the disease at an earlier state than we could before, and then come up with better prevention methods. And so I think while I think the public may not see those immediate advances, I think the scientific field is very, very excited because now we're at that really cusp of making that big discovery.
Would you like to say anything to our donors right now who might be watching this interview?
All right, so one thing I have to say specifically about the Bright Focus Foundation is that it really helped launch my career. So when I was just coming out of residency, I was just starting this project about studying weight loss and Alzheimer's disease. And some senior people were saying, why are you studying weight loss and Alzheimer's disease? Isn't it a memory problem? And that's when I said, look, this is really important because we see in our patients and we know the data is there that weight loss really impacts these patients. So we've got to figure out what's going on. And the Bright Focus was one of the first ones to really help support my research. And so to the donors out there who's really listening, this is something that's critical because a lot of maybe the national government or some of these bigger agencies won't fund those early science that might be just studies that are just trying to come up with a proof of concept. But I think something like the Bright Focus has really helped develop this research area that I hope expands further and further.
Great. What excites you most about current trends around your area of research?
Right. So there's a lot to be excited about, and I'm sure there's a lot of people here who will tell you about their stories. But I think in general, Alzheimer's disease, that idea that it is a continuum, that is no longer you have memory disorders, you have memory problems, and then you have dementia, and unfortunately people pass. We know that it starts much earlier. And that concept of being able to identify things that happen earlier and then being able to treat earlier, I think is what's going to make a difference. And so really, I say is that our research now is that we can identify patients very, very early. Now we've got to figure out a way to treat those patients.
What's something that people may not know about working as a researcher?
Yeah, so being a research scientist is a little bit different than most career paths, I always say. I think it's very similar to being like an artist. That's what I like to think of it as. And so one analogy I use, which may not be a good one, is I think it's like working in a movie in which you might see this really famous scientist who wins a Nobel Prize or who comes up with a cure, and you read that headline. And so that could be that famous director like Steven Spielberg winning a big prize. But there's a lot of people working under that person who's really working every day to day to make a big difference. And so it is like working like a movie in many other aspects too. There's small indie movies, such as my lab, which is a little bit more modest size, and some of the bigger name labs out there. And so I think that concept of teamwork, a variety of different researchers, all with the common goal, and that like movies, some are duds, but by making all these movies, eventually we hope to make that one major discovery, that big impactful moment. And I think that's the way I kind of describe research, at least from my perspective.
Fantastic. And I would say that that's primarily, how you would probably describe your research to family and friends as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, most of my family members are non-scientists, so they always ask me, well, you have a MD, why don't you just see patients all day and really make an impact there? Mm-hmm. And I say, yes, that's part of what I do, but I spend most of my time in the research working with this team of great scientists and hopefully advancing that that mission of trying to come up with the next cure. And so that's what I tell my family, and that's what inspires me to do so.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. To our viewers, we will be back with more from our grantees in a few minutes. Thank you.